The aim of this presentation is to examine epistemologically some taken for granted conceptions concerning climate change education with the aim of supporting climate change curriculum development. The title of the presentation is Interrogating Climate Change Education Epistemology, Identifying Hindrances to Curriculum Development. Educational policymakers today are facing the unprecedented challenge of having the responsibility to teach students about the imminent and unavoidable climate change calamities, while at the same time bearing the responsibility for students' well-being and flourishing. To the best of knowledge, never in educational history such a challenge was put at the feet of curriculum developers. This presentation aims to support climate change curriculum development by examining two critical hindrances on path to developing an effective curriculum. Specifically, I apply an epistemological approach for interrogating the effectiveness of implementing the cross-curriculum approach in climate change education and the application of climate change education within the framework of education for sustainable development. The majority of publications addressing climate change education seem to agree on one thing, that climate change is multi, inter, or cross-disciplinary. While the epistemological descriptor multidisciplinary conveys the idea that the knowledge is derived from multiple sources, this descriptor forms hindrance for effective climate change curriculum development in two ways. First, by giving the false impression that we have characterized the body of knowledge where in effect we have not. Secondly, by providing a conceptual springboard for the misinformed conclusion, assuming that if climate change is multidisciplinary, then it follows that climate change needs to be taught in multiple disciplines. Concerning the first hindrance, characterizing climate change as multidisciplinary is epistemologically lacking. This is because most knowledge created by humans may be characterized as multidisciplinary. Take, for example, a concept such as photosynthesis. At its narrowest, it involves physics, light energy, chemistry, light energy transformed into chemical energy, and biology, the transformation takes place in proteins. At its broader interpretations, photosynthesis is involved in biogeochemical cycles impacting the climate. The same can be said for most disciplines. They are all multidisciplinary in essence. Biology evolved from zoology and botany, ecology evolved from biology, chemistry, physics, and earth sciences, and so on it goes. Furthermore, characterizing climate change as multidisciplinary is insufficient because it still leaves us with the question of what are the disciplines that make up the multidisciplinary knowledge. Obviously, if there are no disciplines, there is no multidisciplinarity. The second form of hindrance is of particular concern. Here it is assumed that climate change ought to be taught in multiple subjects. This misleading conclusion seems to typify the approaches to climate change education inclusion in the curriculum. For knowledge to be processed effectively, it needs to be systematically structured and organized. The dispersal of climate change across the curriculum leaves students and teachers on their own to collect the fragments and integrate them. The approach also creates challenges to various aspects of teaching and learning. Cross-curricular themes are placed low in the curriculum hierarchy, lacking benchmarks and standards. Such is the case with the sustainability cross-curriculum priority in the Australian curriculum. While the cross-curriculum approach is the most advocated approach for including climate change in the curriculum, empirical evidence suggests that very few countries implement this approach in their curricula, and when they do so, it scarcely filters down into actual implementation. For example, in a review that I conducted examining the New Jersey climate change curriculum, the curriculum proclaims in its introduction that the approach for implementation should be cross-curriculum. However, it was revealed that effectively climate change contents appeared only in two learning areas, in science and in social studies. When addressing the discrepancy between the cross-curriculum advocacy and its poor implementation success, the literature commonly tends to lay the blame on the curricula, on schools, and on teachers for not trying hard enough. However, this lack of success is grounded in educational theories and may be inferred from theories of learning, teacher knowledge, and curriculum theory. In summary, the cross-curriculum approach for implementing climate change education is empirically ineffective and theoretically unsubstantiated. The second hindrance to climate change curriculum development relates to applying climate change education within the framework of Education for Sustainable Development, ESD. UNESCO and other international organizations promote this approach. However, framing climate change within ESD involves three forms of hindrances for effective climate change curriculum development. First, there is an inherent tension between curricular structures and ESD. Secondly, ESD is morally questionable as an agenda for school curriculum. And thirdly, ESD is insufficiently aligned with scientific facts, and I will explain these points. Most curricula present some form of content-based organization, even when they are focused on competencies development. These content-based organizations seem to be at odds with ESD. The roots of ESD are in environmental education. Environmental education was developed in the 1970s as a content-based field. Until the turn of the century, an increasing number of countries included environmental education subjects in their curricula, often entitled environmental studies or environmental science, particularly in secondary schools. In 2002, environmental education was formally displaced by ESD at the World Summit on Sustainable Development in Johannesburg. The years 2005 to 2014 were designated as the Decade of Education for Sustainable Development, and UNESCO was nominated as the lead agency. Since then, ESD evolved under the leadership of UNESCO as a problem-based agenda. The difference between the environmental education content basis and the ESD problem basis is epistemological and relates to the structure and organization of the fields. Content-based fields are organized bodies of knowledge. Problem-based fields have no organization, similar to problems that individuals have throughout the course of life. These are ephemeral and anecdotal. Problems come and go. This difference is at the heart of the tension between ESD and content-based curricula, a tension that did not exist when environmental education was still around. I will elaborate further. A chronological analysis of the ESD framework reveals perpetual conceptual inconsistencies, giving a sense of shifting sands. There are many examples for this. One such example is the replacement of the 15 perspectives constituting the framework of the Decade of Education for Sustainable Development with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals in 2015. It can be seen in the table that except for gender equality, all the other titles have changed. Even climate change is now called climate action. Gonzalez-Bodiano described ESD perspectives as an elusive thematic group of issues where ESD provides an empty space of congregation for the various fields and in turn becomes an empty signifier. There are no rules and regulations that govern the ways in which the empty space is filled, making ESD knowledge ephemeral, anecdotal, with no principles and concepts of organization. Contrarily, climate change has evolved over the past 100 years as an organized body of knowledge with rules for determining claims of truth and well-defined concepts and principles that govern the knowledge production which can be taught through climate change education. For example, we can compare the two concepts in climate change and in sustainable development. In climate change, the term greenhouse gas is defined and governed by the scientific rule of molecular vibration and re-emission of infrared energy. We can make a claim of truth as to whether a substance is a greenhouse gas or not based on whether it follows this rule. In comparison, ESD perspectives and goals are merely incidental assembly of ideas forming part of an agenda or inspiration, such as SDG 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. The absence of such governing rules and principles of organization is not a minor issue in ESD. Rules determine truthfulness. In the absence of rules, claims of truth cannot be refuted or verified, thus leading to a relativist worldview where all claims are equally valid. Such is the case, for example, when BP, a company responsible for the emission of 340 million tons carbon dioxide equivalents per year, can safely claim on their website that our purpose is reimagining energy for people and our planet. We want to help the world reach net zero and improve people's lives. Under the ESD framework, such claims are not refutable and may be accepted as truth. The epistemological shift from the environmental education content-based field to the ESD problem-based field had profound implications on the stagnation of ESD over the past 30 years since 2002. This is due to the inherent tension between curricular organization around concepts and ESD organization around world transient problems. Quack criticized UNESCO's conceptualization of DSD as turning a robust field of environmental education into a 21st century simulacrum of education for sustainable development, detached from reality, or more precisely, untethered to the planet. She continues to state that it is still unclear whether ESD is meant to be an oriental principle, an actual subject, or an umbrella term encompassing environmental education, climate change education, and other permutations of ecologically oriented principles. Consequently, the inclusion of a climate change education within the framework of ESD forms hindrance to climate change curriculum development. The 15 ESD perspectives were abandoned in 2014 at the closure of the Decade of Education for Sustainable Development. Subsequent UNESCO publications increasingly focus on utilizing education for the purpose of societal transformation as an end goal. Priority Action Area 4 describes the means as empowering and mobilizing youth. In the 2020 roadmap, this goal takes a stronger tone with statements such as education needs to transform itself. The roadmap also sets the aim to review the purposes and values that underpin education and reorient all levels of education and learning to contribute to sustainable development. The document further calls for surveillancing education systems and monitoring how well they train students as change agents. Schools and education systems are called upon to reroute their purposes and educational operation modes to serve this agenda. Statements such as these raise a question as to whether it is morally right to allow any agenda to govern and repurpose the curriculum. Many educators may feel alarmed by this apparent attempt to hijack the education systems for achieving a prescribed agenda. This is because many educators share the view of schools as places where children are supported to grow to their full potential, whatever that may be, and not as training facilities for prescribed purposes. Gert Biesta expressed this view by stating that what they, the students, will do when it matters, that is, when they encounter something in their lives that addresses them and calls for them, is something we can never know in advance, which also means that it is fundamentally beyond our control. Furthermore, Biesta suggests that instead of asking what the schools should do for society, which seems to have become the most prominent way in which the task of the school is nowadays being conceived, Biesta asks what society should do for the school so that the school can be a school. Finally, there may be an additional tension between ESD and the scientific consensus. The peak international body representing the well-organized and conceptualized climate change knowledge is undoubtedly the IPCC. However, some evidence suggests that ESD may be getting in the way by muddling the science facts, drifting climate change education away from its evidence-based sources. This may be exemplified by comparing the ways in which the term mitigation is defined by IPCC as compared to its definition within the ESD framework. We can see from the comparison that the ESD version adds a range of unsubstantiated factors and generic slogans to the original IPCC definition. Without delving into the lack of evidence basis, it is sufficient to state here that some of the added claims are not aligned with IPCC and they are controversial at the least. To conclude, the interrogation of climate change epistemology have led to the following conclusions. The cross-curriculum approach for including climate change in the curriculum is the most advocated approach. However, empirical evidence suggests that this approach is not working as well as expected, and there is lack in theoretical basis to support this approach. Climate change needs to be taught independently as a content-based topic, either as a subject in its own right or within the broader environmental contents, as was the case when climate change was taught as a topic of environmental education. ESD agenda seems to be an inappropriate framework for hosting climate change curriculum. The ESD agenda raises a moral question concerning its aim to utilize education for the purpose of societal transformation in what seems to be an attempt to hijack the education systems for achieving its prescribed agenda as an ulterior goal. ESD may be overlaid with unsubstantiated agenda-informed claims. And finally, a quote from Selby and Kagawa: recent calls for the integration of climate change education within mainstream education for sustainable development should be resistant. Thank you very much for listening to this presentation.